Coming up on Dateline tonight, an incredible story that aired almost 20 years ago but was given new life this year thanks to a group of women who had been targeted by a smooth-talking predator and banded together in honor of another young woman who was brutally murdered by that same man to make sure he stayed locked up for good. Keith Morrison shared their story as a Dateline podcast series that was #1 on the charts for weeks, and now the True Crime Original is sharing updates on the case and bringing it back to television. Keith Morrison will join us in just a moment to preview the 2-hour episode, but first, here's a preview with Keith's interview with Kirk Johnson, the father of Christy Johnson, the young woman who seemingly vanished into thin air on a February evening in 2003.
It's devastating. You know, there's not a word that describes it other than the fact that you don't have any answers. What is this? Maybe she got on a sailboat and went to Mexico. Maybe she went to a concert.
You better hope so.
And joining us now is Keith Morrison. Thank you so much for being here to talk about this case.
Thank you for having me.
So some of our viewers might recall this story. Although Christy did live in LA at the time of her death, she grew up here, graduated from Saugatuck High School in 1999. Now, Keith, before we get to the update, can you give our viewers a quick overview of this story?
Well, this is a story about a young woman who was, conned by a smooth-talking predator and led to a place up in the Hollywood Hills, a city which she had moved to in hopes of having a career in the film business. And she died there. And then the great puzzle was who did it. And it took quite a while to sort it out. And then the puzzle was, what else had this man done in addition to what he did to poor Christy? And it turned out a lot. He was, in fact, a habitual predator, psychopathic sort of character who had a particular and very specific kind of fantasy that he employed over and over and over again with quite a number of women. So that is the essence of the story now, is what has happened since we originally looked at it all those years ago. And that is to say a lot. As these women got together, figured out what happened, understood who else was involved, and did something about it.
So you spoke to the man who murdered Christy after his trial, and he pleaded to lesser charges. If this had gone to jury, he could have faced the death penalty. Why did prosecutors make a deal like this?
Well, court cases, in spite of a recent one we heard about, court cases can be, maybe that's a case in point, it can be very unpredictable. You just don't know what a jury is going to do. And neither prosecutors nor defense attorneys like that very much, honestly. And in most cases, a prosecutor, in most criminal cases, would rather make a deal, would rather be certain of the outcome, even if it isn't quite as much as he or she would have wanted to achieve. So the difference in this case was Paleologos was facing the death penalty. It was a death penalty case back in those days. And he pleaded it down, as he had done over and over again as he played the justice system. He pleaded it down not to life without parole, but life with the possibility of parole. And then he very cleverly managed to avoid admitting to what he had done, even though that should have been part of the deal. And so then 20 years later, when California changed the rules about when a person could get parole, and could get it earlier if he was an older man, and he is now, he was eligible, and these women did not want to see him out on the street. A psychopath is a psychopath, no matter how long they live. And so it was that effort that we talk about a lot in our program.
So this original story on Dateline aired back in 2006. There was movement in the case. What has brought this case back to the forefront?
It really was the efforts of the women. And the lesson in it is not only the kind of person who would assault all these women, what his techniques were, how the bizarre way that he managed to do it, the weirdness of his particular fascination with certain kinds of clothing, etc. But it was their power that they didn't realize they had that eventually persuaded the system and him and the perpetrator that there was no way that he was going to beat these women. So that was really quite remarkable to watch, and it was something that developed in the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's an incredibly interesting case, and you can tune into Dateline tonight to hear the full story surrounding the death of Christy and find out how these women victimized by the same predator stood up to make sure Victor Paleologos never struck again. Dateline's Girl with the Hibiscus Tattoo airs tonight on Wood TV. Thanks so much for joining us, Keith.
Thank you for having me.